right, we are back with a special edition of the Zag Talk podcast today as we give our rapid reaction to Selection Sunday now that we have a bracket this year. No March sadness this year in 2021, so really excited to have this bracket. We're going to kind of walk through some of the big headlines and some surprises that we've seen in this year's bracket, and then kind of go into some of our picks and what it's going to look like for Gonzaga and kind of our opinions there. So we're pumped to be here in March and still playing basketball. We just had a great week of conference tournament games with lots of close games, overtimes, buzzer beaters, and everything. So pumped to be here. Hope you guys are too, and enjoy this special episode. To kick it off, just the top few lines, I think these last few days were there was a lot of moving and jockeying for position between the top line and the 2 and 3 lines. It ended up being that Michigan dropped from their number 3 overall seed to number 4 overall, which I think we're all pretty happy with the way that Illinois is looking right now. And other than that, Houston stayed on the 2 line. They sealed that by winning their conference championship yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. And other than that, the big one, I think, was Oklahoma State as a 4 seed. I know when we were talking this week and weekend, we thought, maybe they would slide up to even a 2 seed, especially if they would have won the Big 12 tournament. Obviously, the committee had different plans, and they're a 4 seed in Illinois' bracket, right? Yeah. And that is brutal. That's
wild.
I mean, and we'll get into this a little deeper later, but from the surface level looking at it, it seems to me that Baylor and Illinois got super tough draws in terms of just the teams that are in there. Maybe less so with Baylor's 4 and 5 seeds, but overall, it's tough. Ohio State looks like they're back on their game and obviously moved up and hopped Iowa on the 2 line, which is why we got Iowa in our bracket. And other than that, bubble teams, we did get some mid-major love. It seemed like BYU, not a bubble team, but got up to a 6 seed up in the West Coast Conference. And then we did have Colorado State just missed the tournament. They were the second team out, but Utah State was in from the Mountain West. We had a 2-bid Mountain West. Drake got in. They were kind of iffy in terms of, they've kind of sputtered to the end of the season, but they got in. So good to see. We'll have some new faces, some fresh faces in this year's tournament. Dylan, do you want to kind of go through Gonzaga's region specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So kick things off. We're going to have to wait to see who our first game will be against. It'll be between Norfolk State and Appalachian State. So they're one of the first 4 games. And then we'll get Oklahoma or Missouri, 8-9 seed in the second game. And I think for that one, probably a toss-up. I think we were split on, or we were 1 and 2 on who thought Missouri, who thought Oklahoma. Going to be an interesting game there. In our region, we've already beaten our 2, 3, and 4 seeds by double digits. So that's Iowa, Kansas, Virginia in that order. And then rounding out the top 7 seeds, since we already mentioned Oklahoma and Missouri, are Creighton, USC, and Oregon. I think Oregon's potentially underseeded since Will Richardson's come back from his injury. They've looked pretty solid. Obviously hurts they don't have N'Faly Dante at this point in the season. I think they would be probably ranked a lot higher and won a lot more games had they had Dante for the whole season. He tore his ACL earlier in the year. From an upset potential, UCSB in the back half of our region definitely has some potential. And then rounding out the region, we've got Creighton playing UCSB. Ohio will take on Virginia. USC is also going to have to wait to see who they find out. They're playing. Eastern Washington will be opening up against Kansas, and VCU will be Oregon's first competition, with Grand Canyon playing Iowa in the first round. So a relatively decent bracket or region. I think we ended up pretty easy. That's what happens when you're the number 1 overall seed. So I think it's shaping up pretty well. Guys, any thoughts on our region?
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Kansas and Virginia. That's something I probably should have touched on at the top, but Thursday of this week, it was kind of like last year happening all over again, where suddenly you have teams with COVID and they were pulling out of their conference tournaments. And I think it was blown a little bit out of proportion. But obviously, there was some gray area in terms of the 7 straight days of negative tests. But one thing I think to look out for with those games is that Kansas was already missing, I believe, McCormick, and I don't remember who the other player is, but they're already a pretty small team. They're not very big heavy. And against Gonzaga, for one, that's huge if they don't have him. And you have to imagine, even if he is testing negative, like we saw it with other teams this year, and even Gonzaga, they were saying the guys who had COVID, like it wears on you for a while. So who knows if he's going to be ready to go. And Virginia, we don't really know the extent. I think it's less so than Kansas in terms of guys who are actually playing. But that is something to look out for, that we could end up having a replacement there. So we'd end up with a bubble team like Louisville or Colorado State. Those would be the first two if those two couldn't play. So, and we might be looking at these teams with not their full rosters. So could be potential upsets if they're not already on upset alert. But that's kind of the big thing that stands out to me. I know, Dylan, you said Oregon. I like Oregon, but I also really like VCU. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I have it Gonzaga versus Iowa in the Elite Eight, which we'll touch on later. But I think they're probably, that kind of seems like the two-headed monster right now.
Yeah, for Kansas, that is probably the most intriguing team and intriguing scenario for me, just because it seems like they've been playing really good basketball recently. They beat up on Baylor a little bit. And just looking at David McCormick's numbers, who, to be honest, was kind of trash at the start of the season. Only scored 8 points, had 3 rebounds against St. Joe's in their second game of the season. He only had 8 points against us. He's only had one game in their last, one game since January 28th, where he has scored fewer than 10 points. And in the last 4 games, he was really on a tear. And even though they had close games against, UTEP, Texas Tech, he put out stellar performances himself. So I think that, they're a team to watch out for. It really does depend kind of on who has COVID. And I hate that it's kind of that way, and we're trying to pinpoint like who the individual is that may or may not be playing when we face them. But they're really the team to watch out for me. Beyond that, I do think that our side of the bracket puts up some really interesting matchups, especially with VCU coming off an A10 tournament championship just now, as of today. Also, Liam Lloyd in the same bracket with the Zags. That's exciting as well. So it'll be cool to kind of have a father-son, same region type, moment. I don't know how much time they'll get together, but I'm hoping that Tommy will be able to see his son play in the tournament, which will be exciting. But yeah, my overall take, and we'll get into this in a second. My overall take is that generally things turned out pretty well for the Zags in terms of how our region stacks up against the other 3 regions. So overall, really, really excited to jump in and chat with you guys about, what all this means, how this all shakes out, and kind of the matchups that we could see.
Yeah, and I will add in, we do know that the 2 players before the Big 12 tournament, it was David McCormick and Tristan Enaruna. I don't know, that name doesn't sound as familiar to me, but it doesn't say that they tested positive. It's all protocol, so it might be contact tracing, but you never know. I feel like they would have traveled if it was positive. So just what we're living with in 2021. But maybe let's jump into what we think our toughest matchup is going to be in each round, respectively. Maybe let's go through round by round. Is that how you guys want to do this, or should we go all the way through for each person?
No, I think round by round makes sense. Let's do it that way.
Perfect. Dylan, kick us off.
Cool. I am the odd man out in this one. I actually think Missouri is the potential toughest second game for us. Although I do agree with the sentiment in general that they're slightly overrated. I also think Oklahoma's been playing pretty bad basketball recently. They've lost 5 of their last 6. I don't see either team giving us too much of a run for our money, but I do think matchup wise, I'm more scared by Missouri playing well than an Oklahoma team coming off of 5 out of 6 losses.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you would have asked me earlier in the season, like Missouri would have been one to watch out for. But I think as things have gone on, we've learned a lot more about them, and I am more worried about Oklahoma. And I think it's less due to how Oklahoma is playing and more due to how Missouri has been playing. And if we're looking at some of the metrics, they do play fast, which is I guess never mind. They're kind of middle of the road when it comes to their tempo, but their luck in terms of Ken Pom, their luck is really what sticks out to me. And intuitively, you would think, oh, if you're more lucky, you're probably going to win some more games. But in reality, the luck runs out. And I think that a majority of, their record or the reason why they've won 16 games is partially because of that. So I think they're a little bit of a paper tiger. I've watched them play more than a few times. And while they do have some really solid weapons, it seems like those weapons are kind of streaky. And it seems like some of the leaders on their team are less scorers and more like facilitators, which I think, can benefit a team generally, but in a tournament setting, you really need those big time pieces to be able to step up. I just don't think they have that firepower. And Ken Pom shows that too. There are 7 teams that are actually seeded higher than them. So with Missouri as a 9 seed, there are 7 teams that are 10 or higher that are in the tournament as well. And so I think ultimately, the metrics just don't benefit Missouri at all. And I think Oklahoma would be a tougher test.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like you said, they're number 51 in Ken Pom right now, as opposed to Oklahoma's 39th. And it's not like they're dropping down to that. They've been pretty low all season. We mentioned just kind of the play for both of them. I think we could see a month or two ago where it was like, wow, these are pretty good teams. Oklahoma was top 10. Missouri got up to number 10 at one point. But since they beat Alabama on February 6th, they won by 3. I think Brian and I were watching that, and they had been up by like 20 something and almost kind of lost it and shit it away. But they are 3-6 in their final 9 games of the season, with multiple losses to non-tournament teams like Georgia and Ole Miss. And then I'm pretty sure they got smacked around by Arkansas. Oh no, they lost by 6. But yeah, I mean, neither of them are playing their best basketball right now. I think I look at the names and I kind of feel less certain of that matchup or more uneasy about this matchup than maybe some of the ones later in the tournament. But I feel like that's the 8-9 matchup normally anyway. But the reason why I'm picking Oklahoma too is that they're really struggling, but they are a solid shooting team. And we talked about this last week, kind of flashbacks to Wichita State when we got upset in the second round. Just a team who can shoot it in an upset kind of situation. If they get hot, you just never really know. And it's not that they haven't played solid competition all year. So they're going to be ready for it. They've seen good teams all year. And so if they're coming out and they're hitting their shots, you never know. But I really do think this probably continues the streak of double-digit wins. Okay, second round. This one, or not second round, Sweet 16. I have on here, it was a game time decision for me between Virginia and Creighton in terms of toughest matchup. I actually have UCSB going to the Sweet 16, but I think I'm going to go with UVA for this. And my reasoning is not that I think that we won't beat them or that we can't beat them. I think that just we played them the first time and we played about as good as you could play. I don't think Corey Kispert's probably getting loose for 9 threes again. And I probably don't think that they play as bad and turn the ball over as much. And you just know when a team who's lost by that much before, if they're hanging in a game with somebody that they, got crapped on by earlier, it could give them some momentum. And it's just tough to beat a team a second time. And Tony Bennett's a good coach, but I really don't think they have the people, and then like I said, with COVID, you never know who's available. But I think that's who I'd go with.
For me, Carson, I would agree with you. I've got UCSB going to the Sweet 16. I actually think they are the toughest matchup. And there are a few reasons why. First of all, Ja'Cory McLaughlin, who's a Washington product, shout out to him. He's a stellar player. And he's the Big West player of the year. They've got tough wins against LMU and Pepperdine, who we know are no slouches, right? And especially LMU. I mean, LMU gave us fits, and so I think that this team is kind of stepping into, a matchup against us in a way that I don't think a lot of people around the country would expect, especially if you haven't watched them play. The last thing I'll say about this team is just that they rank 295th in tempo and KenPom. So they have the ability to slow the game down, which doesn't benefit us. And I think if they can minimize the amount of possessions, it doesn't bode well for us. So that's why I think UCSB is actually the toughest matchup. Also, I think momentum is a big factor too. Creighton, obviously getting blown out by Georgetown in the Big East championship game doesn't kind of help their cause. And with the coaching issues they've had as well with Coach McDermott, I think, you could see a 12 seed UCSB getting to the Sweet 16 and maybe not giving us a run, but being a really tough matchup. So those are my thoughts there. Dylan?
Yeah, I think Creighton, in terms of matchup, when you don't throw in, I think the coaching issues for sure is definitely going to potentially play some issues come tournament time. But if we're throwing that part out the window and looking mostly, outside of the Georgetown blowout recently, I do think Creighton's a really good team. They're 14th in BPR on Evan Mia's site. They're a good balance of both offense and defense. I don't think they lean too heavily on either as kind of their crutch. So I think from that perspective, if we're talking purely on a matchup basis, Creighton scares me the most. That being said, I'm also in the boat of UCSB looking like a really good shot to go to Sweet 16. So matchup on paper, probably Creighton. Who am I picking for us to potentially play? Probably UCSB. Moving on to next round. That's for me a potential matchup with Kansas. I've been high on them since we played them throughout most of the season. I think they're a highly motivated team. They're a well-coached team. I think coming out of a loss like that to us at the beginning of the season, that's something where you can come in and say, hey, it's a completely different ball game. It's not 2 weeks later. It's not a month later. It's a completely different team. They roughed up Baylor. I think they've got motivation, and they're also well-rounded. They've got some really good defensive guards in both what is his name? Ogbaji. I think I got that maybe. And Garrett as well. So I think they're able to stretch the floor. If McCormick looks good, he's going to give Timmy fits inside. So I think Kansas scares me the most. I think if I had to pick it, they're going to be the ones to knock off Iowa. So that's kind of where I sit for that round.
I would agree. Yeah. Ochai Agbaji, Dylan, is quite a player. He's good. He's really good. I don't think he played his best against us the first time. The two things that give me pause about Kansas are just that in the latter part of the season, they've been playing their best basketball, and also they've got unfinished business. They had an opportunity to move through the Big 12 tournament and win it. Really, I think if they had been able to continue to play, it would have been Kansas versus Oklahoma State in the championship game there. So there's a sense of unfinished business, and I think if they can kind of go on a tear in their first few games, and we meet them in the Elite Eight, that's who I would be most afraid of playing.
Yeah, see, I'm going with Iowa here. I do think Kansas is playing good basketball, but I think maybe the idea that they're playing their best basketball or like really great basketball right now is maybe a little bit overblown. They lost to Kansas or to Texas in overtime, and that was a really good game that I know we watched. But before that, they beat Texas Tech by 6, who we know has struggled in Q1 games. They have 3-8 in Q1, but they beat Baylor. But I think I think people are still a little too high on Baylor right now because they are really, really struggling. Their defense, looking at it now, they're 44th in the country. If you would have told me before they went on pause that they would, I know they were slipping a little bit, but if you told me they weren't a top 10 defense, like I would have probably laughed at you. And they're down now to fourth in Ken Palm. And you just watch them play, and they're not playing the same type of basketball, the same level of basketball as they were before. So I think that win, maybe you take it with a grain of salt. And then the next game they came out and they were down to UTEP for most of the game. And if that's not like a classic, like 3-14 matchup, which Eastern Washington could give them some trouble. Like Eastern Washington is a legit team. If they're missing people too, like watch out, because that could be an interesting game. And then they go and beat Oklahoma by 7. So you never know what would have happened against Texas or whatever. But I just think all this going on too and having that taken out is going to be just weird for them. And then with Iowa, I just like, you have Luka Garza, you have the player of the year, and I know we have opinions on him and his defense and all that. But I don't think that there's anybody on Kansas, even McCormick, who's going to dominate at a level that's going to really affect them on the defensive end. And I think he's probably going to be able to get his 25, 30 points. And then why they kind of concern me, or I think they would be our toughest matchup, is just because of that. They have size and they can shoot the ball. And the other thing too, Big Ten schools, I don't know how much this is going to play into it, but they just played their whole entire tournament in Lucas Oil Stadium, where we're going to be playing in these Elite Eight games. So I was going to ask you guys if you thought about that from an advantage standpoint, because I don't really know. I mean, I know there's stats out there that show that you generally teams shoot better in arenas and gyms that they've played in before. But in that situation, you never know. But it is going to be a weird setup with 2 courts on each side of that banner, and they already had it that way. It's going to be the same exact way. So does that give them a level of comfortability that other teams might have? Maybe. And you just never know. I'd rather not deal with that. But
I want to agree with you. I saw Indianapolis written on each baseline and was like, what the heck? Where are they playing? And then when I found out it was Lucas Oil Stadium and they had the banner up in the middle, I was like, oh my God. They're going to have experience shooting on these hoops. They're going to have experience, playing in this setting. And that really surprised me. I'm actually surprised that, the NCAA allowed that, but it is what it is. It might give some teams an advantage, which I think is a shame, but it is what it is.
Well, and I don't think that this isn't something that necessarily happens every year, because, Big East plays in Madison Square Garden, and there's other locations where teams play where there's first round games, like in Kansas City or something, where the Big 12 plays. So it happens, but I think just because of how different it is this year, with that, I mean, you're not normally playing on a football field with a curtain in between, like you're at the Washington high school state championship game. So we'll see. I mean, there is some time between the first few rounds and when people will be back in there. So I don't know, but it is something that could be interesting if you look at shooting percentages and stuff when teams get there. Upset watch. So I think this year it seemed like, just from looking at it right away, that there's plenty of opportunities and good matchups for potential upsets. So we'll go through and give you some of ours. I think the one that we've touched on already is UCSB over Creighton with Ja'Cory McLaughlin, the Tacoma native, just a stud, and they have the firepower there to beat really good teams, and I think even win another game after that, make it to the second weekend. Winthrop over Villanova. Villanova is probably, like, I can't imagine there's much excitement in that fan base right now, because you lost your guy who's up for awards, who's your point guard, who's just a stud, and they just have not been playing well at all. And Winthrop's a good team, so I think that'll be a popular pick. And then Georgetown, obviously, they're on fire right now after being hot garbage for a good amount of the year, but they're playing really good basketball. And Colorado is one of those teams who, if you saw that we tweeted out our Evan Mia simulations today, and I know analytics are big on Colorado. They're top 20 and in some cases top 10, depending on which site you're looking at. But they've also lost to UW and Cal and a few other really bad basketball teams this year. So I think they are definitely a team that could be susceptible to a hot team who's playing at their peak right now. And then I'll give my honorable mentions of Colgate and Eastern Washington. I've talked about Eastern Washington, but Colgate, they are the second highest scoring team in the country behind Gonzaga. They're running gun. They're super fast up and down, and playing against Arkansas, who's the 17th ranked team in terms of tempo. That game's going to be super fun to watch. And if they're on, like, watch out because they're good. I mean, the analytics love them. What were they in net? They were top 10 for most of the year. So they haven't played a lot of different teams this year. I think I saw at one point they've played like fewer than 8 unique teams all year just because of the way their schedule is. But if it's a good team, it's a good team. So those are mine. Who you got, Dylan?
Yeah, I'm pretty close to your list. UCSB over Creighton. We've talked about it a couple times. Winthrop over Nova. I think they're just so deflated from losing Gillespie, and I think it's just going to be a tough game in general. For it's going to be tough for Nova to get any wins in this tournament. And then for the sake of deviation, but also because I think stepping away from the metrics a little bit and just looking at hot hand, Oregon State just won the Pac-12 tournament, and yeah, the Pac-12 is not great this year. So that's one way to look at it, but also like they're coming off of a conference championship. And I think Tennessee also hasn't looked as amazing recently as they did at the beginning of the season or the middle of the season. So I think that's probably my higher seed upset. We haven't talked about yet. And then I think I'll give the nod to Eastern. If they get a fully healthy Kansas team, I think they get shellacked. But Kansas starts to drop guys. McCormick's not able to play. Kansas in general, obviously, if they're not playing Kansas, I think Eastern's definitely got a shot to win a game in our bracket, our region.
Yeah, who's the guy? I'm blanking on his name right now, but the guy from Tennessee who just got the crap knocked out of him by the guy from Florida's elbow.
Yeah,
because I mean that's something to look out for too. Is that if he can't play, that does kind of change their team. And I know they still played well against Alabama and had a shot to win, but if you don't have him, I think he's kind of a big piece of that team. Fulkerson, and so he definitely looked like he had a concussion because he was sitting on the sideline. He has a black eye that you can't see out of, and then he was wearing earplugs, which kind of seems like telltale, dealing with the symptoms, a little bit of a concussion, but he still wanted to be out there. So, yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that one too. Brian, who are your big upset picks?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that a few have already been mentioned. I really like Winthrop over Nova. I like UCSB over Creighton. Carson, you called out the Colgate over Arkansas matchup. I think that one's going to be one of the most fun games of the first round. Not just because Arkansas and Colgate have top 25 tempos. They like to get up and down the floor, but also because both teams are generally similar in terms of their offensive efficiency. We've got Arkansas at 35 in terms of adjusted offensive efficiency in KenPom. We've got Colgate at 43. And so I think it kind of makes for a recipe for an upset, to be honest. Not a lot of defense is likely to be played. And if Colgate can get up and down the floor, more than what Arkansas is used to playing against in the SEC, then I think we could see an upset there. Also, Georgetown, they're playing really good basketball. So I think Georgetown over Colorado is a potential. I think that, they're definitely playing their best basketball. And then honorable mentions, and I think we'll talk about a few of these later. Drake and Michigan State. Since 2019 2019 has been the only year that a first 4 team has not advanced to the second round. And so I think one of those 2 teams is primed to get there. And then finally, Morehead State, I think, is an unsung hero of this tournament, potentially. I happen to watch their championship game. They got a freshman kid who's just stellar who could potentially give West Virginia some fits. I think their size matches up well with West Virginia, and it could be a tough matchup for him. So those are my upset picks. Ultimately, I think Winthrop over Nova is, I think, the most likely one. But those are my thoughts there.
Well, and I think Winthrop has a chance to win another one too and make it to the second weekend over Purdue, who I think is one of the weaker 4 seeds. They've won some good games, but I think Winthrop's a really solid team. Other ones too, I know these are getting later in there, but I think teams that are a little bit higher seeded to watch out for is I think UConn could really give Alabama a run for their money in that second round game. I think a lot of people are going to have Bama going pretty deep, either them or Texas, but I think they could. And San Diego State out west could get upset in the first round, but they also could easily go to the Sweet 16, maybe even the Elite Eight. They'd have to beat West Virginia, but then they have Houston, which I think is a very winnable game. They're playing good basketball right now. So it'd be cool to have another small team, although we'd have to deal with their annoying fan base Twitter account, the show. So I don't know if we really want that one.
On the note of playing games, if you had to pick a team to win a second game and win their first of their first round game, their true first round game, who do you got winning?
If I have to pick, I'm going with Wichita State. I think they were bubble team. They really did not play great in their tournament, but they had some good wins during the year. They beat Houston in their second matchup. But I really do think that this year follows suit with 2019 in terms of I don't see a first 4 team moving on. I mean, you could see one of the blue blood or new blood teams with Michigan State or UCLA have a chance, but I really do like BYU in the tournament, and I don't have them beating Texas in the next round, but I could definitely see BYU playing a good game against Texas. I just think the athleticism is a little too much there, but I don't know. What about you, Dylan?
I'm taking Michigan State. I think just from a blue bloods perspective, you got a team that just snuck into the tournament on the first 4 games. I think they're going to be motivated. I think they're going to win that first game. And I think that they've definitely got the best chance second game to secure another win. But generally speaking, I tend to go with you on the Carson with this one. I think Michigan State's the team that's going to win that game, but I still don't think anyone's going to move out in the first round.
All right, here's my bold prediction. Watch out for Mount St. Mary's, everybody. They're number 17 in the nation in points allowed. Michigan doesn't have Isaiah Livers, or we don't think they're going to have Isaiah Livers. And right now I'm drinking a beer called Fans in Denial from White Bluffs Brewing. The Michigan fans are in denial, all right? And they believe that they can go all the way. And I've got bad news for him. Mount St. Mary's is going to upset him in the first round after taking out Texas Southern in their play-in game. That's my bold prediction.
And my not so bold prediction is that you've probably had a few too many beers because you used one of my least favorite stats in terms of just straight up points allowed or points scored with no context of tempo. They have the 356th ranked tempo in KenPom. So I don't think teams are getting very many opportunities to score points against them. But I do think Michigan is in some serious shit. I think them and Baylor. Baylor I do have going further, but both of them, I mean, maybe we transition into this really quickly. I don't think we had this in our outline really, but we were talking about it when the bracket was released. Baylor versus North Carolina in the second round. That's a very winnable game for North Carolina with their size. I think if Wisconsin wins that first round game, Baylor wins that easily. But there's that one. Michigan in the second round against St. Bonaventure, the Bonnies, like that could be a loss there for sure. I probably won't pick it because that's a little too early for me, but Florida State then in the next round or a hot Georgetown team, like they could lose early. And Baylor, I think if they get away from North Carolina in the second round, that they're pretty solid until the Elite Eight. But we were watching that Ohio State-Illinois game, and Ohio State could give them issues too. They have great guard play. the guy from CJ, what's his last name? The guy from Florida State who transferred to Ohio State, number 13, their little guard, CJ Walker.
Oh, CJ Walker.
Yeah, and Washington,
Yeah.
like they got studs out there too that I think could match up pretty well with Baylor. And then inside, they don't have the huge size, but they do have guys who that's fine with Baylor because Baylor really doesn't have the huge size in terms of big scorers or guys who are going to make a huge difference down there. So that could be a really, really interesting one. And I think I actually have a Illinois Ohio State rematch in the Final Four as of right now, but I might change that.
I was just going to agree. UNC Baylor, most intriguing second round matchup for me. UNC's long. Baylor's got their guards that can do their thing. I'm really curious to see how Baylor plays that. But yeah, that's definitely an intriguing matchup for me. Ohio State is also playing very good basketball as well after beating up on Michigan or beating them in a very close game. And then taking Illinois to overtime. They're playing really good basketball too. So I think Baylor has a really tough road, especially in that second round game against UNC.
I think Baylor's got a tougher road. I think if I'm going to pick the first number one seed to lose, I think I'm going to take. If I'm a betting man, I'm putting my money on Baylor because they have to play UNC, or they're most likely going to play UNC in the second round. So I would pick that as the most likely upset. However, if they get past UNC, it's going to be Michigan because I don't think Michigan wins 3 games. I think they're going to win their first 2 games, and I think no matter who they run into in the third round, I think they're going to have a lot of trouble. So I think that's kind of where I fall on the who's got it tougher, Michigan or Baylor. Baylor's probably going to be challenged first. Michigan probably won't win more than 2 games. That's my take on those 2 parts of the bracket.
Well, and I think if Illinois wasn't playing as good a basketball as they're playing right now, we'd be talking about them being in some serious trouble too. Because, I mean, Loyola, I screenshotted a picture of this, and it was going around Twitter earlier in the week, but there's a guy who put together a thing that shows, how under or overseeded a team is. And he was using based off of bracket matrix, projections. And they were one of the most grossly underseeded team as an 8 or 9 seed in a super, super long time. I think the methodology there was based off of adjusted efficiency margin and the average adjusted efficiency margin of the other teams on that seed line. So relative to other 8 seeds, Loyola's head and shoulders above. And I mean, they're top 10 in KenPom. They're top 10, I think, in net. But yeah, I mean, they're a really solid team. And I don't think they're going to give Illinois too many issues. They do have a big who can go up with Coburn, but I just think Illinois is probably too athletic. But then you get past that and you get most likely Oklahoma State, or depending on what Tennessee team you get, they could give you a good run too if they get out of the first round. But Oklahoma State, we were worried they would drop to a 3 line and we might see them in the Elite 8, and we did not want to see them play. And I know there's a lot of hype there right now too, but I do think they're a really solid team that could really give Illinois some issues. If they were in Baylor's or Michigan's bracket, that'd be the easiest pick in the Sweet 16, I think, that I would make besides Gonzaga. So yeah, I mean, I think we got really lucky with the way ours kind of shook out, but you never know. It's March.
Can I call out a fun stat real quick? There are 4 players: Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird, and Hershey Hawkins, who all have recorded 1,500 points, 800 rebounds, and 300 assists in their careers in the Missouri Valley Conference. And this year, Cameron Krutwig joined that company, which is just, it's so funny. It's really funny to me. You've got 3 legends, and then this kid who is a great player, and I'm really excited to see how he plays this year in the tournament. And I think that's part of the reason why Loyola could give Illinois a run, just because they're the number 1 defense in KenPom, and they've got a big that could potentially match up with Kofi one-on-one on the defensive end, at least. I'm not sure he'll be able to score as much as he usually does, but on the defense end, I think he could play pretty well.
I will throw out there too, in terms of Loyola, if that were to be an interesting game, we saw it today, and there was a lot of talk about it with Illinois. Ohio State did not make them pay at all for their kind of sloppy play and turnovers and just these kind of errant passes. And I mean, you look at Ohio State and they have the 79th ranked defense. And like you said, Loyola is number one. They're going to make you pay, and they're going to turn you over. And unless Illinois is able to turn them over at a high clip, like, you're looking at some serious issues potentially there. But I do think Illinois prevails there, but it's going to be a good game, I think. All right, so let's jump into our Elite Eight and Final Four and champion predictions. Initially here, just first look at the bracket, kind of going through and eyeballing it. Brian, do you want to start with yours?
Sure. So my Elite Eight matchups, out west, I've got Gonzaga against Kansas, Baylor, Ohio State in the south, Oklahoma State and West Virginia, and then Georgetown, Alabama. So my rationale for each of these picks is just that, obviously Gonzaga is the best team in the nation. I really do believe that Kansas's athleticism is gonna kind of power them through. Again, I think that they are playing well. I think they're gonna push through the Elite Eight. Baylor and Ohio State are both playing really well. I know Baylor just they lost out in the Big 12 tournament, but I think that they will have the ability to push through matchups against UNC. As we've talked about, if they can get through that UNC matchup, then they'll be able to get right to the Elite Eight, depending on who they're matched up with, whether it's Purdue, Nova, North Texas, or Winthrop. I think they'll be able to get to the Elite Eight pretty handily. Ohio State, same thing. I don't know if they've got a team that can match up with them. I think that Colgate will get past Arkansas, and that'll kind of take away Ohio State's toughest matchup. And then ultimately, I really do believe that Oklahoma State is going to knock off Illinois. Illinois is playing extremely well. There's no doubt about that. But I think that on the right night, Oklahoma State can make their run. I've actually got Oklahoma State to my Final Four as well. And if we look at each of the past 10 years, there's at least one 4 seed or higher that has made the Final Four, and that's my pick to go to the Final Four, outside of the top 3 seed lines. And then finally, Alabama, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think Michigan's going to go that deep, to be honest. And then Georgetown is going to be the big surprise, the 12 seed that makes the Elite Eight. My Final Four: Gonzaga, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Alabama. And then my championship game is going to be Gonzaga versus Baylor, and I think Gonzaga is going to take it. Carson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have in Gonzaga's region, I think we've already kind of touched on this. I have Gonzaga versus Iowa, and then down in Michigan's, I have Florida State versus Texas in the Elite Eight. I have Florida State knocking off Michigan, and I actually have UConn beating Bama in the second round. That's going to be one of my big ones, and then have Texas moving on from there. And then Baylor and Ohio State, like you said, I think they're going to get everything they can ask for from UNC in that second round, but then I think they have a nice path after that to the Elite Eight. And then Ohio State as well. I think they're just playing really well, and I don't see any team in their bracket. I think if Arkansas were to make it through, that could be an interesting game. But I think that was probably my easiest one in terms of getting those two teams to the Elite Eight. And then the last one, I have Illinois and West Virginia. I think Illinois is going to have a real tough. Their second and Sweet 16 games, if it's Oklahoma State and Loyola, are going to be really tough. But I do think that they have the guys to get it done, especially inside. I think Coburn will be a lot for Oklahoma State. And then Final Four, I have Gonzaga, I have Texas, and I have Ohio State beating Baylor. I think Baylor I trust their guys. I know them and Michigan are kind of, stumbling to the finish line a little bit after, Baylor's pause and everything. But I trust their guards a little bit more than I trust anyone on Michigan's team. But I mean, it's really different. If they're not playing the defense that they were playing before, that's a completely different team. And Jared Butler is not quite back at the level he was before. And we keep hearing these, guys on TV saying, I really just think like they need a week of practice and they're going to be back on it. It's like they had a 4 or 5 day gap after end of Big 12 season before they started in their tournament. And then they come out and almost lost a game to Kansas State, who's terrible. And then they lost to Oklahoma State. And so, yeah, Oklahoma State's a good team. I just really think they're struggling right now, and I really do like them. And if they were back kind of playing the way they were, obviously that'd be the easiest path to the championship, I think. But they're not, and so I have Ohio State winning that one, and then I have them playing Illinois in a rematch of this overtime game today. And then I have Illinois versus Gonzaga in the final. Two hottest teams, the best team all season, and then the hottest team now. And I have Gonzaga winning it all, if that's not a shocker to anybody.
Alrighty, I'll round us out. My Elite Eight, I've got Gonzaga, Kansas. I got Florida State and Texas, Illinois and West Virginia, and Baylor and Ohio State. I'm pretty high on Florida State. I consider them our March Madness nemesis. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I'm just still pissed about them beating us a couple years ago. I just think they're a really strong team. I think they're well-rounded. I think Scotty Barnes matches up really well against Corey Kispert. So I think that's going to be a potential. That's my Final Four game is Gonzaga versus Florida State. And I think that's going to be a hell of a game. And then going over to the other side of the bracket, I've also got a rematch of the game that just played today, Illinois and Ohio State. I do have Illinois winning that game yet again, although I think it'll be a close game like it was today. And then I've got Gonzaga over Illinois. My only note is I think I'm actually more worried about whoever we end up playing in the Final Four in this scenario, whether it is Florida State or Texas or any other team from that region. Than I am about playing Illinois or Ohio State in the finals. Maybe that's a hot take, but that's where I'm at. I'm less scared by Illinois, Ohio State. I just think we match up well against both those teams.
Yeah, I think I get that. I think Coburn scares me maybe a little bit in terms of just his size if we were to get in foul trouble. But like I texted you guys today, he really struggles to stay out of foul trouble, especially if you have a big who can bring him out a little bit. And Timmy can do that, and Watson can do that. So, yeah, I mean, and we'll have plenty of episodes to talk about, as we move on in this tournament. But yeah, I think we're feeling pretty good, and I think just excited to get this going. One last thing to touch on before we kind of wrap things up is we tweeted out today. Evan Miyakawa on evanmiya.com has been having his bracket sim since the start of March. And so originally he was doing 20 teams or 20 different sims per day. And we posted those results, which were pretty favorable for Gonzaga. We were making 68% of the Final Fours. I believe it was 59% of the championship games and actually winning 40% of all of the simulations of the 400. So we'll keep that updated. I believe he's going to change it to doing 100 per day. But for maybe the first 4 days or so, I'll try to keep that up to date since we now will have a set bracket and teams' numbers won't be changing at all. So it'll be a little bit more consistent and won't have changing variables, changing seeds and everything. So keep an eye out for that. And then I'm also going to have some cool charts and graphs just for some of the Ken Palm numbers and trends throughout the season. And then, where we kind of plot with the teams in our bracket and just kind of the landscape of the tournament. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be out on Twitter, Instagram, everything like that. We're going to do another episode here early this week to kind of give us a more in-depth review of the two teams that we may see in the first round and second round, kind of like we did at the beginning of the year with our scouting reports. So if you're looking to see, what we're going to come up against with some of these less familiar teams, tune in. And until then, go Zags.
Go Zags.
Go Zags, baby.